Kwe kakina, Gilbert Whiteduck, the Shinkas Kitiganzi Binindon Juba. I was feeling a little bit of pressure this morning, but I must tell you that I felt the most pressure when I heard Adushkan saying that he was waiting for me to speak. The reason being is that we owe a lot to our young people. What we are doing now, the decisions we're making, is certainly going to impact his generation and is impacting his generation directly. So in deciding of what I was going to speak about, it may sound to you a bit eclectic, but important for me in deciding which words that I was going to use. I'm not one that normally writes what one could call a speech, but I decided to write it. So I wish you good morning, and that I'm honored and humbled to be here with you this morning. As mentioned, my name is Gilbert Whiteduck from the Kitigan-Zibi-Nishinabeg Algonquin community, which is located about 130 kilometers away from Ottawa, and we are part of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Many months ago in ceremony, I was given a traditional spiritual name. I didn't ask for it. It was given to me. I'm still seeking for really what its meaning. And in the lodge, it was given to me that I was the one with one tear. I'm still searching for what that really means. But I'm honored to be here this morning to welcome you into Ottawa, which sits, as has been mentioned, on the ancestral Algonquin lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin, which has never been ceded or surrendered. This is the land of my ancestors who traveled the waterways of the Ottawa River, which is nearby, which we call the Kitchissippi, or the Big River, with all of its tributaries being our homeland for over 10,000 years, what we say since time immemorial. This is the land of my ancestors that gathered in this area to share, to celebrate, to hold ceremony, to welcome new life, and to return to our mother, its loved ones. This is the land of my ancestors who welcomed the settlers immigrating to this homeland, who came at times to escape their own countries, which were in turmoil. The prophecies had forewarned our ancestors that one day there would be newcomers, and that we were to greet them and share what we had, as the teachings had told us that we did not own the land and all that it gave, but that we were the caretakers. This responsibility as caretakers we have never given up, as it was given to us by the Creator. The Anishinaabe Algonquins of this territory welcomed the settlers, and in the early years, the settlers relied on our ancestral knowledge to survive. There were promises made by the settlers, first the French and then the British. We as Anishinaabe understood a commitment of the spoken word to mean that it would remain for as long as the rivers flow, the sun shines, and the grass grows. This was not to be the case, as our ancestors quickly found out that settlers were often full of deceit that had come under the cloak of darkness. We nevertheless continued to be inviting and ally ourselves as we wanted to protect the land. As it has been written sometimes or said, the settlers did make one promise, and one that was kept, and that was to take control of our land, and that they did. They tried to take our spirit, but they have not succeeded. We were, among many other things, many of our Indigenous people have fought in all of the wars. But we were an important ally during the War of 1812 when we fought alongside the British against the invading Americans. The great Shawnee chief Tecumseh rallied some 10,000 Indigenous warriors, of which 150 were Anishinaabe Algonquins. The warriors joined the alliance to protect their homeland with a promise that we would have access to these homelands once the war was over. This does not take place, and we were quickly displaced, removed from our ancestral territory, and put on postage stamp pieces of land called Indian reserves. It is my belief that Canada was only able to become a nation because of these warriors, and history would have had a very different chapter if these warriors would have refused to be allies. But we quickly were forced and continue to be forced to become wards of the settlers who had taken control of our land through force and the imposition of a law that continues to exist today in Canada, and that is the Indian Act. This act was instituted in 1876 to remove us from our lands so settlers and industry could have undisturbed access to the resources, and it was also an act that was meant to move us to being assimilated to our termination so we would melt into the Canadian society. Well, I'm pleased to share with you, if you don't already know, but we're still here. Our language, the language of the land is still here, and our ceremonies are still here. We continue to advocate and continue to work as caregivers of the land so that what has been given to us by the Creator will remain healthy. The rivers, as the elder mentioned, are the blood that runs through Mother Earth, and when the blood is not clean in our own body, we are not well, therefore this land is not well and needs to be cared for, just as it cares for us each day. We have a sacred responsibility to care for the land as we have to care for each other. The creation of this wonderful country called Canada in 1867 was not done with the full and equal involvement of Indigenous peoples. We were pushed aside. And let it be known that even if we did not ask, we were not considered to be Canadians until 1961. Our leaders at the time viewed the decision to be considered as Canadians as covert action to finally attempt to strip us of our Anishinaabe nationality, our nationhood. We were and are Indigenous nations. We have never given up our Anishinaabe nationality, even in light of imposed violent acts such as the imposition of residential schools, forced movement off the land, child removal under the guise of child protection, the genocide, as we define it, of the life givers, the Anishinaabe Ikwe, our women. The promises continue, as does the pain of intergenerational, complex, accumulated trauma. I honor the women, the Anishinaabe women, all Indigenous women, the life givers, as we should all do. As we have always been a strong people, resilient and loving, we continue to be warriors to defend our homeland. The youth of the past, as the youth of today, have demonstrated that their connection to their identity as Anishinaabe is what keeps them grounded and which allows them to find balance in the world where they continue to try to find their rightful place. I am proud of the Indigenous youth today. I am proud of you, Odeshkan. I am proud because in spite of many challenges, many have been able to surmount the pain with determination and become fierce warriors in a world with invisible and at times very visible walls. Many of these youth carry what we call are the sacred teachings that are really teachings that all humanity should, and I believe in some way, carry. And these are humility, honesty, courage, respect, truth, wisdom, and love. There are important steps being taken in Canada to move towards an era where we as Indigenous peoples will have our equal and rightful place. The rightful place is not only about money, it is about getting the respect we deserve and full access to our lands. It is to have this country officially recognize in a very formal way that the founders of this country were not just the French and English, but that the indigenous people were the first and are the backbone of this country. It is my premise that this country will never find the balance it seeks until indigenous people can regain what is rightfully ours. This does not happen with words, but mostly through actions. We have a long way to go, but there have been steps taken towards a destination called reconciliation. We have wonderful indigenous nations with citizens who are connected to an ancestral past, but who have been impacted by a colonial past that's set to destroy it through all means. The legacy of this colonial past is still present in today's society, and therefore there remains many indigenous people who carry deep pain that is still seeking to be healed. This healing must be a collective effort through actions that are meaningful for those most in need, and there are many. I acknowledge that indigenous people from around the world have faced and continue to face this type of reality. We must collectively bring about change we owe to ourselves, to each other, and to our Creator. Let me now briefly speak about immigration. If indeed immigration is a given, there is a need for all newcomers, which we welcome, to understand the indigenous realities of Canada and, most importantly, the area in which they decide to make home. It is and will be important for immigrants and displaced peoples that come to this country to not internalize the prejudices inherent in the fabric of Canadian culture. Indigenous people, since contact, have always had solidarity with displaced and vulnerable peoples and continue to have a generosity to share our knowledge, our resources from this land. It is my belief, and I say this with humbleness, that Canada needs to truly face its colonial past, build a just relationship with Indigenous people, reconcile and redress, help heal the wounds while it is welcoming and wanting to settle and integrate over 300,000 newcomers, immigrants and refugees every year. There is no doubt in my mind that without Canada achieving such an historical reconciliation, it will be difficult for the newcomer to ultimately settle in a fair country. You may ask, what role can a newcomer play in contributing to reconciliation? I would tell you that the refugees, the immigrants, the dispossessed may have a distinct capacity to understand historical injustices and show empathy and solidarity. This can only happen if there is dialogue that is meaningful, based on mutual respect. I was encouraged recently by reading an article that dates back to 2017, and it was in a National Observer, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a Syrian refugee, and the article read, "Syrian refugee wants to learn about Canada's First Nations," and which read, Fadia Juni, I believe, a 19-year-old Syrian refugee, has recently come back from Winnipeg, where she gave a passionate presentation about First Nations and why refugees need to learn about their history. "I feel very bad. We're on their land," she says in a soft voice, speaking in downtown Vancouver. She says fellow refugees are occasionally surprised by her interest in the topic. "Why do you care about what First Nations went through?" some ask her. The experience of displacement makes her feel close to them. She says, "I feel the same as them in some way," she reflects. "The First Nations were moved from this land. I understand what this is like." Immigrants, most of them that are increasingly visible minority, may at times be in competition for jobs, depending on the area. But this can be changed where we can actually complement each other and make it really a win-win situation with innovative socio-economic solutions to create meaningful jobs with focus on protecting the environment, our mother, the earth, and become warriors to overcome discrimination, to one day culminate into an holistic, just society. Canada is and will always be a work in progress, and a need to continue to build mutually respectful and peaceful relations between the settlers and First Nations, and nowadays, with increasing newcomers, is both urgent and necessary. There is no turning back. I acknowledge the work that you do and want to share that First Nations were always welcoming. This country has always been welcoming, but somewhere in that welcoming, First Nations were forgotten. You know, we continue to feel that we are invited to dinner from our own resources, from our own land, but must stand outside the walls of society to receive the leftovers. We are only invited to the main table when our heads are bowed or our words resemble that of the colonizer. And for that, I really want to extend to a friend who invited me to be here, Humit, for allowing me to say these few words today. I honor that opportunity and the invitation for the elders. But I stand proud on this land, knowing that Canada must do better. We stand with our hearts and minds open for those who come to this country. We stand with all Indigenous peoples and all peoples who seek justice and those who are escaping injustices. I am but a small man, one person, but in my heart I carry hope and belief that we have a collective responsibility. This is a time to tear down those invisible and visible walls that keep humanity from connecting in a peaceful manner. My ancestors that welcomed settlers over 500 years ago continue to do so because our teachings tell us that we must share what we have in a good way as Creator wanted. Finally, I do want to say to each and every one of you that you can and are making a difference. That you carry, I believe, a fire of hope, each one of you, that when put all together becomes a fire of change. Challenge yourself, move beyond the status quo. And I raise my hands in thankfulness that we can together bring this world to be more balanced, just, and loving. Miigwech Majashin.